Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast, where host Dr. Kirby Rosplock speaks with experts on topics relevant to the ultra-high net worth family wealth management space. Please note, the views and information shared are for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or investment advice. Kirby is author of several books including The Complete Family Office Handbook and shares her expertise consulting with families and family offices. Kirby is also the founder of Tamarind Learning, an online wealth education platform that develops practical foundational learning programs for beneficiaries to help them prepare for responsible stewardship of wealth.
Welcome to the Tamarind Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirby Rosplock, and we're going to explore some interesting concepts today, some that might be new to you. Actually, it's new to me because I have children, but today's conversation takes us to a really important, oftentimes overlooked portion of the family systems that are out there today. And I'm talking about this child-free economy, which again, our guest today is Dr. Jay Zigmont. He's a TEDx speaker. He's a cultural economist. He's a leading expert on this child-free economy. And guess what? It is a huge segment, right? Jay, you said it's something like 25% of Americans don't have children.
It's 25% is the number right now, but when you look at the younger generations, it's growing. You look at adults under 49, if they don't have kids, 47% said they're never going to.
That makes my jaw drop, right? I mean, it's pretty incredible. And I really don't think most financial planners, most investment strategists, most people are thinking about the implications of this because, Jay, this is your business. This is your whole target. And tell me how you came to focus on this segment. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So when I was starting to become a CFP, the interesting thing was there's no mention in any of the education, any of the literature about living a life without kids. Everything assumes you either do have kids or you will have kids. And my question was, both my wife and I are PhDs or researchers. So my research question was like, are we just weird? Is it just us because we don't have kids and we're weird because, we'll sit around at dinner and talk about research studies. So, that's a little weird, but are we weird for the life we're living? And come to find out, it's 25% of the US. So my thing then is, why is it that all financial planning has these assumptions in it that just don't fit a quarter of the population?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, right? When you think about primogeniture, this concept of passing on wealth along the bloodlines and your eldest male heir, and all of these really sort of foundational views on wealth transfer kind of start to go out the window because we're not talking about passing on wealth or business interests or material things to people in the sense of our family. It means you got to plan completely differently. So tell us how you even approached thinking about the planning of this unique subset.
Yeah, so actually I went out and talked to a whole bunch of child-free people. I've talked to over 1,000 child-free people, either interviews, surveys, to figure out what they're doing and then going, oh, wait, how can we help? And come to find out, by the way, from a financial planning standpoint, 80% of them have never worked with a financial planner, which is flip of what you normally get.
Yeah.
So when we get clients into our company, almost all have not worked with a planner or they got handed down their dads, and I don't really like him. We hear a lot of it. And what we find is that as a child-free person, you have to plan for your life first, then your finances. So the standard life script says you go to school, you get married, you have kids, you pass on generational wealth. It's that American dream. Well, what happens is that's actually built into software, built into financial planning assumptions. It's the life stages that we are all taught. And you don't realize how much that creates a systemic bias that doesn't fit child-free people. We add on that child-free people, 1/3 will never get married. They might be partnered, but not married, or alternate family structures. And all of a sudden you start realizing, oh, our standard planning process just doesn't work. So we work with the clients and we'll try to figure out kind of what do you want to be when you grow up, which sounds like a joke, but it's that's the question. What's the point of it? And then how do we make your plan match that? And the financial planning stuff is actually relatively easy. The way we look at it is we try to make their life amazing and make their finances simple. because that's how you get that magic combo.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about how you're set up is you've set up a child-free trust structure. So maybe you can tell us just a little bit about your business and how that's a little bit differently positioned than maybe a traditional RIA.
Yeah. So it's a separate company. What we found is when we were starting to talk to child-free people, the number one question is like, well, who's going to take care of when you're older? And it's somewhat thrown in child-free people's face, like, with it's kind of a double-edged question, because my thing is that implies you think your kids are going to take care of you. And by the way, the data says, well, maybe.
Yeah.
And what happened was we started looking for who makes decisions for child-free people when they can't. It turns out in the U.S., about 25% of people are either live 5 hours or more away from their family or have no family at all. So if you have no family, no kids, and you're single, like, it's an estate planning problem, like who makes the decisions. And if you don't appoint somebody, you end up in the court system, which nobody wants. The conservatorship, guardianship, like that's just a no man's land. So it turns out in California, Arizona, you can appoint a professional fiduciary to do it, but they're the only states that have a licensed professional fiduciary that can do the medical, the financial, and all of it. Trust companies can do it, but they really don't want to do the medical. Like the medical's like, no, I'll do the assets. But the other problem is child-free people can somewhat be a bad client in the eyes of trust companies because they want to die with zero. So if they're trying to run down their assets, the trust company, percentage of assets, it's going, it's possibly a conflict that's going the wrong way. So we created Child-Free Trust. It's the first nationwide solution to who makes the decisions for you when you can't. So we become their medical power attorney, their financial power attorney, their executor and trustee. And the example I love to use is if my wife and I are in a car crash, who makes our medical decisions, who makes our financial decisions, and who lets our dog out. Now, my wife says I'm wrong, but darn well, if I'm in the hospital with her, she's going to be more worried about the dog getting let out than me. And that's like those things you think about, oh, well, my kids will take care of that. Well, no, you don't have that. And that's where we step in.
That's amazing. And I'm sure you've had probably some of those incidents already manifest, huh?
There's these things you don't realize. So a great example is we had somebody reach out to us before we even started, and she was going to get a knee surgery, which is technically elective, and the hospital denied her getting the surgery because she didn't have somebody's name to put down. And I'm like, what's she supposed to do? Like hobble on the knee for the rest of her life? But the problem is the system is so broken that if you don't check the boxes, the hospital's like, nope, that's a liability. Forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which honestly is the worst. That's insult to injury, right? Like you're already probably uptight about whatever surgery or medical issue that you have. And then to be sort of shamed for not having a person or family, right? And there are a lot of individuals that are either estranged from their family, maybe they were orphaned and don't really know their family. So I can imagine that, the data also, I know, and the research shows that people are just more insulated. They're more isolated. They're living not in sort of a community framework as much as we were, say, a decade or two ago. So I'm sure you're seeing incidences of child-free households growing.
We are, and we talk a lot about kind of solo agers, and about 60% of child-free people over the age of 55 are single legally, so they're not married, they're divorced, they're widowed, whatever it may be. And that becomes quite the issue. There's 15 million child-free people over the age of 55. So you're talking about millions and millions of people that keep running into these issues. But the problem is our estate planning system, and you touched on it, was created like in the 1500s, British law. And it really has not changed much since then. And let's be real, that we go back to the 1500s, your life expectancy was like 35 years. You born and died in the same house, your family was all there, generational house. None of that's true anymore, but our system still assumes it is. And we end up in this, we call it the fiduciary void, like this problem of oh, these people are left out to hang.
So let's clarify really what is so different. Obviously, we know you're focused more on the now versus who's next. But what are the other elements that someone who's child-free has to think about that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so let's run through a few different things to change. So one of my favorites to kind of poke at is buying a house. For a child-free person, if you're going to move all the time, why buy a house? We are a mobile group, and we don't have to stay in an area for the school system or to be near family or whatever else it is. So I tell my child-free clients to rent. And actually, if you do the math on it, renting in most cases works out better because you don't have that built-in cost to move. When you look at your investments, there's actually a point for child-free people where you can have too much money because most want to die with zero, where they can make different choices early, where we call it FILE, finish, spend, live early, which is let me dial back on work. Let me do the work I enjoy. Let me kind of coast the rest of my life in something I enjoy rather than classic retirement. Things like life insurance, not a real big use for a single person. You need to have some money to bury you, but it's supposed to be there to protect your income for others. But disability insurance on the other side is a huge priority. If you're single with no kids and you get disabled, Social Security disability pays you nothing. It's a reality check. Then we get to long-term care and how we plan around that. We always have to plan on the cost. And the problem is long-term care is most expensive for single women. Well, welcome to the audience. And then what gets interesting is a lot of child-free people are expected, well, you don't have kids, so you can take care of mom. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's an assumption. We need to have a conversation about that. So we actually build into our financial planning process what we call plan for parents, which is weird because we're child-free folks, but it's talking about their parents. Where most people talk about generations going the other way. No. We're making plans going, how do you take care of your parents? Because, we don't want you to get forced to move back with mom unless you want to. People talk about the millennials not leaving the parents' homes. And I'm like, it's flipping now. The parents, And then we start kind of looking at the overall plan, and then we have to plan to die with zero, which breaks all the systems. If you've ever done a Monte Carlo simulation, the whole goal is to not die with zero.
Yeah.
So for our child-free people, if you get a 95% success, that means a 95% failure. And all of a sudden you start seeing it breaks all of these norms to the point where most planning software has a trouble with it. We use Right Capital as our planning software. And part of the reason we do, it's the only one that allows a couple to be in the system and not married. Everything else assumes. So this is where you start seeing weird things. And then the other one, particularly for your audience, is if you're going to be in a generational wealth setup, so your family's passing down generational wealth, we have big issues with generation skipping trusts. Because what happens when, you're not going to have another generation? And I don't know if you've ever had to do it, but if you've ever had to go to court and try to prove to the court, hey, by the way, there's no new generation coming and I want to amend this trust, it is a huge nightmare. And I try to have people have those discussions earlier because, the reality is they're not going to change their mind.
Yeah. And it's not like at 75 or 60, they're going to start adopting, right? So it's also this weird, there's a phase in your life, and maybe because I'm past this phase, whether you're either thinking kids are in your wheelhouse or not. And I don't know that it sinks in that makes you kind of in a different financial planning track. So how do you reach your audience? How do you help them be aware that they have some different planning options? I'm not saying this isn't good or bad. It's just they have things that they have to think about that maybe the married couple with 2 kids or 5 kids doesn't,
Yeah. If you take 2 parents' financial plan, you got some 2 kids, 5 kids, it's pretty linearly the same. It's kind of the same path. The timing changes a little bit. Some of the numbers shift, but they're relatively similar. What I tell child-free people is if they're working with a financial planner or they want to, ask the financial planner how your plan is different because you're child-free. The number one answer they get from financial planners is, well, you'll change your mind. And I'm like, no, that's kind of disrespectful and disregards them. The number 2 answer is it's not different, which is just as bad. The third is, let's figure this out. I don't really know. So we find we actually are very fortunate. So I've done a lot of press, done a couple of books on this, done all different podcasts. If you put child-free financial planning into the Google machine, it comes back with us. And people start going, oh, I never thought about that. And I never thought about that. And I never thought, and I got a phone call from somebody. I did a piece with Wall Street Journal. They did a feature on us. And I got a phone call from this gentleman. And he goes, I didn't know the word child free exists, but it's me. And I didn't know this is things that change, but that's me. Can you help me? And I'm like, yes, that's like that aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's that one of those things that like if you go into AI now, because that's favorite, and ask it how to do your financial plan, it's just going to assume you have kids and give you that advice.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's so built in everywhere into the assumption. And I know you have written extensively the Portraits of Child-Free Wealth and Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. I mean, I can imagine that you have so many incredible stories of how you're helping. And I'm curious, if we shift to the sort of millennial demographic, that's probably a child-free growing sector. I mean, they're in the thick of it right now, but I would imagine you're seeing more and more couples who or cohabitating partners who are like, yeah, we're not doing this. Like we're not procreating and we don't have any interest to. What does that look like for those that are really in the thick of it, in that time where they would be making choices to have kids or not have kids?
Yeah, so we see a lot of it, and we call that often we see it. We call the moment we call the child-free midlife crisis, which is you hit your personal, professional, financial goals, and you're like, "What's next?"
Mm.
Which is a good question. It's like, am I just going to do this for the next 40 years? Like, where am I going? And one of the other weird things about us, so our social media, our clients, it's 80% women. So, and even if it's a couple, usually the woman's the one that's reaching out to us. So where other firms may have a whole lot of men reaching out and, followers, it's really women. And what they're reaching out for is they're like, okay, what's the point? And am I doing it right? I always love this kind of like, am I behind? And I'm like, I hate that type of concept because there's no such thing as being behind or ahead but what we tend to find is people that have done very well. And they're like, okay, I've hit my fire number in some cases. Some people that love that fire stuff or other things. I've hit my professional goals. And then like, what's the point of money going forward? And this is where we have some really good discussions. So my PhD is in adult learning. I'm really on the behavioral side. And it's kind of how do you shift your money mindsets is where we spend a lot of our time. And what we tend to find is a lot of people are doing jobs they don't like. They're working towards retirements they don't want. And they're following the script they're told to do, like buying a house. They've already bought the house. They hate it, and then I'm like, how about we change it? So one of my paraplanners at the time was keeping track. It was something like 60 or 70% of the people I met with in the initial meeting, I told them to quit their job. And the reason is, if you're going to work this job, and we see this a lot in millennials. All right, I'm making $150,000 a year. It's a good job. I'm moving up the ladder. I hate it. I'm like, well, then you're saying for $150,000 you want to be miserable. And they're like, well, but that's what I'm supposed to do. I went to school for this. And I'm like, are you going to do that for another 30 years or whatever else it is? And all of a sudden you see these child-free people going, no, I want to do something different, and where we have people, quote unquote, retiring, we call it file, kind of cutting back on work at 40. And they're like, I'm going to go back to school and be a librarian. And I don't know why he's always a librarian, but that's pretty popular. Or I'm going to go follow a different passion. And what we also see with millennials, and my wife and I'm Gen X, my wife is millennial, we follow what we call the Garner and the Rose approach, where we take turns between who's growing and who's providing support. We see a lot of that. And what you're seeing is a lot of kind of career life work and focus, and less on like, hey, can I get you an extra 1% in the market?
Yeah. So intentional, right? So purposeful, and really connecting the dots of your means and what you can do. Like, what is the possibility? I'm curious if you've run into child-free inheritors who are sort of torn between that expectation of like build more wealth, succeed the family business, do all these things, and then also sort of feel like, but that's not really what I want. And I don't really want to pass this down to heirs, or I don't have an ambition to, be a giant wealth building mogul. So how do you deal with those kinds of cases?
Yeah, there was a funny one. This person inherited dad kind of died suddenly, so there wasn't really a good discussion around it. Tens of millions of dollars, and they get pulled into a room with a whole bunch of suits. This is her wording, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The 4 suits come into the room. Hey, let's sign this paperwork. And she's like, I don't even know if I want this money. This is what my father earned is worth. I don't know that I believe in using it the same way. I want to give it away. I want to go. And the suits are in there, like giving her portfolio analysis and how it's going to grow and how much she can safely. She's like, none of that meant anything to me because it's not my goal. And it's an identity question about what matters. So a lot of child-free folks are charitably minded. That tends to be where their money goes. But we want to give it during life so we get the tax breaks and we see the impact. It's not about, hey, I'm going to take that tens of millions of dollars and then, 3x it over my life and then give it to the next generation. It's not. But there's also this honor your father, your mother kind of thing of this is where it came from and the pressure. And what we find is many of them, if it's sudden like that, they have to work through it. If it's where they can have a conversation with their parents, it's always better if you can kind of do it before they die of hey, I'm going to go a different path. Is that okay? And I don't know. I probably 50-50 on if the parents accept the person's life or not and where they're going to go with the money or not. There are some parents where I've seen they go, okay, you know what? My son is not having kids. My daughter is. I'm going to give the daughter all the money, which is always going to cause its own issues. But what I try to get people to do is have those conversations early. So I had a client, we just went through this, inheriting, I don't know, 7 or 10 million, something like that. And the parents had given the paperwork and it was all set up in generation skipping trust and they're not having kids. So they went to the parents and let's have this conversation. And it took about 2 years for the parents to go, all right, I get it. Let me look at updating my paperwork. And that sounds small, but that is a huge win for the family and having that conversation because now, I actually sat in meetings as their financial planner, sat with the parents' financial planner. We're like, okay, well, maybe the better answer here is to give some of it while you're alive. Can we use it to go back to school, to invest in a business or something? Can we see the impact? Can we shift that? But what I love is the family was actually talking about it. And that's the bigger part.
That it's just bringing so many things up for me because I think about how wedded one generation can be to what they perceive their legacy is, not really realizing the impact it can have on successive generations. And if the conversation is had and they can understand what their children, like their adult children, kind of want and see, it really might change how they perceive what they want to do as you're sharing. And I think that's such an aha and so powerful. And I also wonder, are advisors equipped to support these conversations? This sounds different. This isn't a traditional sort of, hey, I want to pass wealth down to as many generations as I can. And then, oh my gosh, my kids have no interest in passing on wealth. So how do you make sure advisors have these conversations in the right way?
Yeah, I would love to say that they're all engaged and, getting there. And I had somebody recently email me. We were talking about our child-free trust system and, referring to us. And his response was, well, if I enroll them in child-free trust, it takes care of the estate question, but it does nothing to increase their assets. So why would I bother referring? And I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to this story than that. And what you find are there advisors that are more on kind of the life planning, the comprehensive planning, the true overall picture of planning that can engage. But here's what I found. I was working with a family office and they were talking about they didn't have the skills in-house to have that conversation. You want to have the conversation about how to make a dynasty trust and how to make this last forever. They've been doing it for 150 years. This is one of those old school. They're like, we don't know how to do this. So that's where I spend half my time kind of educating financial planners and others about it. And the other half talking to child-free people. When we hire people, we actually have an issue with this because I can't hire anyone ready to go with this. It's not like I'd be like, there's a child-free wealth specialist certification. We have one in-house, but it doesn't exist in the real world. There's not like I can get people that are trained for it. So I have to find people that are interested in more of that life planning, that comprehensive, that having the hard discussions and less on the finance. For us, we actually meet with our clients on a monthly basis, which really kind of messes with people's heads, but their life are that dynamic. And out of the monthly meetings across the year, we might spend 10% of the time on their actual financial numbers.
Wow.
We're working on these.
Yeah, you're working on these big life issues and you're really getting into the meat of a relationship that has much more, depth and knowledge. And I'm sure that helps you anticipate in a different kind of way.
Yes and no. So I always look at it. If you look at financial planning, the new CFP curriculum, it talks about behavioral finance. Everything says about 80% of your success with finance is behavioral. I'm like, great. So then spend 80% on the behaviors, your time and effort. Like that's kind of my thing. I try to anticipate with child-free folks, but in the same year, I got one phone call from this couple and they said, hey, we're going to retire. We've said that's it. Okay, cool. The next month it was, oh, I got a job offer in Germany. I'm moving to Germany. Okay. We work on that plan. Then they're like, no, that's not going to work. We're going to move to Canada for a little bit of time. And I'm like, okay. Get to the end of the year. They're like, all right, no, we're actually out. We're moving to France. And I'm like, that's all within 1 year. and that's the norm for our folks rather than the weird thing. So I actually have two clients I can think of on the top of my mind where they're almost in an on-off thing month to month. Like 1 month, we'll work through things, no big deal. And the next month they're like, oh, by the way, I want to buy a plane. And I'm like, all right, sure. And then they're like, no, I'm going somewhere. And that dynamic is why we actually meet with our clients on a regular basis, because things change that fast. And that's the difference.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to this, like, stick to a script, follow, what you've always known, and this is the model, and we procreate, and so on. I mean, it sounds like they're more fluid. They might be more adaptable, and they might be more opportunistic if they see things that they're like, yeah, this is kind of interesting. I want to do that. How does this shape or shift how they think about their legacy?
Yeah, legacy is a great question for our folks. And I'm doing a lot of work on this. And what I'm calling it is legacy beyond lineage. So we talked a little about kind of the parents putting pressure on. And by the way, we've all been there. Your parents put pressure on that you need to carry out their legacy. And anyone that's kind of Gen X millennial has probably felt it really hard about now of like, oh, you've got to do the right things, what your parents want. And we know that's not right. There's some good and bad there. But for child-free people, what we do is we talk about what we call the obituary question. So the question is, the first line of your obituary is like your name, your address, Jay died at this location. The second is what father of three leaves behind Jack, Joe, and John. We don't have that. So what is that for our child-free people? And then how do we have that match their overall plan and have their plan go through it? And I had a great example. So we just put out a podcast on this. I've been working with a client for 3 years. He's actually a NASCAR crew chief, and he's been doing this forever. He's got 2 Daytona rings, which for the non-NASCAR folks, that's like 2 Super Bowl rings. Like this is, he's got it. And I said to him, we're kind of getting to that 50-ish age, kind of what's next. And I said to him, I said, hey, does the second line of your obituary say crew chief? And he goes, no. I said, well, what's it say? He says, a good man. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how do we unpack that? How do we make your goals and your life match that? And really it was about leadership and leaving stewardship behind in others and helping, create good men. And I'm like, well, what does that mean in this current society? And then it's been a great discussion. But here's the thing. It's not a simple answer. When you ask that obituary question, you ask that legacy question, it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to pass on generational wealth so my kids are in a better place than I am. That's actually a somewhat simple solution. How do I figure out how to help him get to a measure where that when he leaves that, whole that is a good man, he's happy with that. And his time, effort, and money went to that. It's not as cut and dry as it seems.
Yeah. And I could see people maybe jumping to a conclusion like, oh, well, you didn't use all your money up in your lifetime, so you just gave it all to charity. And so that is maybe a cop out too, because maybe there's so many different things that big giving pool might mean to you, right?
Yeah, I had another client. I asked the obituary question, and she's a big gardener. She's actually got a blog about it. She does all this stuff. And she said her impact is she wanted that garden that everybody in the neighborhood stops by, looks at the flowers, looks at the plants, and looks at the butterflies and feels better. So her time and effort and money should go into that. Well, that to me is giving, but it's not like giving to a charity. It's not like, it's impacting that small community and really having that impact. But the flip side also is child-free people often get pressure like, well, because you don't have kids, like you have to do something amazing, like, and that's why I liked working with this crew chief, like that's sports and, it's a celebrity and all that. And I'm like, he's like, no, that's not the point. Like, it's not about your job title. It's not about like how many dollars you leave. And if you're child free and you're charitably minded, I want you to be giving during your lifetime because then you see the impact. You can get the tax breaks where we're doing, a lot more crutz than people otherwise would do in other structures. But it's not necessarily about like, I have to make more money. And it really messes with people's heads when you can say there's a point in a child free person's life where earning a dollar more is not good for them because it's going to a goal they don't care about. Like there's actually a point where you can have too much money. And that just sounds weird.
It does sound weird. And it's so strange when we look at our socioeconomic pyramid of haves and have-nots and knowing that there are so many people that can barely make rent, barely put food on their table, barely put gas in their car. And then to think of the abundance, right? The other side where there's so much resentment, right? We have to own there's a lot of resentment right now in this world around means and economic privilege. And I think for someone who's child free and doesn't have children, I can imagine they carry more of a load than just the average person.
Yeah. So we get a lot of guilt that we have to unpack. And some of that's self-imposed, some of it's imposed by family. Very, very common to get, well, I mean, you don't have kids, so you should be able to take care of your nephew's college. Or my favorite, it's dumb, but my favorite is Christmas time, the new like gaming system comes out and they're like, hey, you should buy your niece, nephew that gaming system. And my child free people are like, no, I'm buying it for myself. They can come over to my house and play, And what happens though is the question we often go through with our clients is it okay for you to be comfortable while other people struggle?
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't have a full answer on that one. That's an individual thing. And especially when it's like family members that are struggling but we end up having a lot of conversations about how can you help your family members, ideally without giving them cash. We do a lot of like, hey, let me buy you a financial planner for 6 months to help you get out of debt. Or, let me go hire a concierge doc so they can fix your medical problem. Or let me hire you a dietitian or whatever else it is, or a career coach where they can have an impact, but not be handing out money. Because the problem for child-free people is once you start handing out money to family, you become the ATM. Like and that's for everybody, but it's super true. Because like, well, you don't have kids, so you can afford to buy my diapers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's just setting up a bad resentment cycle.
Yeah. And then it's like, where are the boundaries and how do you say no? Like you've set precedent with this one and now this one's coming and this one. And like, again, we know families are, I'll say lumpy where socioeconomically, they're not all the same across the board either. So it's not uncommon for family members who have had success or have had some inheritance or something to be viewed as the endowed party that should be doing more for others. Oh my gosh, this topic is so fascinating, Jay. What haven't we covered that you want to make sure we talk about?
I want to pick up just where you left off there, and I want to give one great example. So I had a client who, between the two of them, they had 3 parents. So 2 parents on one side, one on the other. And they felt the pressure that they want to take care of their parents in their old age. And by the way, very common, like that's their thing. And my argument is your parents' planning or lack thereof can have more impact on your financial plan than your own planning. So what we find is parents that either are broke or rich. There's nobody in between, there's very little. And they said, okay, we want to plan for long-term care. We're going to put us in a financial plan. We want to pay for it. So I do the math. I'm like, okay, you two would need to put aside about $750,000 to cover that. And they were like, oh, wait, I want to help, but like, there is a limit.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up setting up a program. It was beautiful for them that whatever they were putting away to retirement, they put an equal away towards their parents' long-term care. And when that money runs out, mom, dad, I'm sorry, this is what I can do. But it's about setting those boundaries. Well, that is one of those things. And I think a lot of parents can actually learn from child-free people about how to plan for this for their parents and how to do different things that we often overlook of like, yes, we're living two different lives, but we can learn from each other.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. Jay, I should say Dr. J, you have so much wisdom. I don't even know what to say. This has been so fascinating. Loving this conversation. I want to make sure to do two things. One, promote, you have Love, Wisdom, Money. No, sorry. Tell me your name of your book again. I just butchered it. It's
that was somebody else. Mine is The Child-Free Guide to Life and Money.
Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. So, and where can they find that?
Everywhere. Amazon, bookstores,
Everywhere.
Whatever you want. Yep.
It's the yellow book behind you, correct?
It is.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to jump into a quick speed round, if you're okay, and just ask you just whatever comes to mind. It doesn't have to be a long response, but what's one myth about child-free living you wish you would disappear?
That all child-free people are rich. There's no magic check that comes in when you don't have kids.
And what's the most common mistake child-free people make with their finances?
They don't have an estate plan in place. We found less than 20% of child-free people have an estate plan in place.
Yikes. Okay. If you could change one thing about the financial planning industry, what would it be?
We need to move to real behavioral-based and life planning more than just investments.
Yeah. I love that. And what's your favorite resource or book for those considering a child-free life?
No, I can't say mine. I think here's the thing. There's a bunch of books about the choice of being child-free or not. If you're in that phase, I think the other stuff that's out there is actually on social media and online. Most of the stuff for child-free people is just coming out now. So all books are kind of old.
Interesting. So does that make you want to update yours?
So if you haven't written a book, my book came out December of 2024. It was due 18 months before that. So like by the time you write a book, you're 2 years behind.
Yes.
And I do have others coming. I'm working on one on legacy and kind of that next step. But I'm like, everything you write is already old. Like I'm creating child-free financial planning as a concept as I go along and going, oh, I would update this in the book and this in the book and this in the book before it even came out.
Yeah. No. I'm just curious, who inspires you in your work?
You know, I've been watching a lot of the interesting content creators, the ones creating things that have never existed before. So, Stephen Bartlett, Diary CEO is one I love. Rory Sutherland on the marketing and how do we change the way our minds work. They may look a little weird at the surface, but really I'm looking for people that are willing to challenge the norm. And that's what inspires me.
And what do you do to unwind after a really busy day?
Unfortunately, when you run two companies and all that, I don't have much time. I tend to, if I can find time, it's video games, or because I'm doing this work with NASCAR, I get to go to a couple races here and there.
That's fun. Well, those are both fun outlets. And I am super duper grateful for having you on the Tamara Learning Podcast today. You are quite a wonder and bringing so much good information. We will have more links to resources about child-free planning, your website, your books. And I'm just super grateful for you opening my eyes to this important group of individuals. Some are in my family. I won't call them out, but they know who they are. And I know everybody has child-free if they're not themselves. So I'm really, really appreciate that we're bringing the spotlight on this topic and the work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me. I'm sure it's a different topic than you normally have, but that's what I like digging in.
Well, it's a topic I love digging in, and I'm super grateful and hope you'll come back.
Will do.
All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this segment, please like, subscribe, share with your family and friends. And you can find us on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. We should be out there, as obviously on our Tamara Learning website as well. So thanks. And that's all for now. Signing off.